How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news, who publishes peace and brings good news of happiness, who publishes salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. The voice of your watchmen, they lift up their voice, together they sing for joy. For eye to eye they sing, the return of the Lord to Zion. Break forth together into singing, you waste places at Jerusalem. For the Lord has confronted his people, he has redeemed Jerusalem.
Please be seated. So good news. Good news. That's what verse 7 is all about. Good news. Publishes peace, brings good news of happiness, publishes salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. Getting ready for today, it seemed appropriate thinking about good news. I heard a bunch of people say when Sherry's surgery was scheduled for May 1st, oh, that's May Day. Well, that wasn't something that I really grew up with a lot. I'd heard the term, so I did some research and found out a little bit more about May Day and the giving of baskets of flowers on May 1st. And did any of you grow up with that? Was that a tradition? Okay, a bunch of you. Okay, so I grew up in Boise, I guess. Maybe we didn't do May Day in Boise, Idaho in the 60s or something. I don't know. But anyway, baskets of flowers that were given on May 1st here in this country. Any of you have any stories, appropriate stories you'd like to tell about basket flowers giving? No appropriate story. No.
At school, we used to make little May Day flower or the baskets and give them to each other at school.
Okay, so almost like Valentine's, you'd make little baskets of flowers and give them to each other at school.
We go out in the fields and pick the flowers.
Oh, how cool is that? Go out in the fields and pick flowers. Anybody else do that growing up in school? You did? Hung it on doorknobs. Oh, yes.
That's the only time you get away with ringing the doorbell and running.
The only time you can get away with ringing your doorbell and running. Okay. Yeah, that was part of this history that I was reading about. Was the idea was that it was anonymous, so you would leave the basket at the door and then try to get away before the person could see who it was. And I even heard tell about, I guess part of it, at least sometimes, was that if you caught them, you kissed them. And I don't know if that was part of any. No. So, but anyway, baskets, quarters. Oh, if you caught them. Well, my parents gave us a basket of flowers on May 1st, and it was good news. They were bright and cheerful flowers, very encouraging for the day. Good news. We all need good news. And the flowers, Nathan brought up flowers before worship. If you got to see some of the flowers, they were bright on that screen, a little dim on this screen. But there are lots of, our world right now in the Northern Hemisphere is blessed with flowers abundance. And those of us with allergies, you all know what that's about. And so we don't have any flowers in here to aggravate that. The flowers are good news. The flowers are welcome news after a long, dark, wet, cold winter. To see the brightness and the colors again from the grayness of winter, the bare branches, and we know what that's like. We know what that's like. The people of Israel who were in exile also knew what that was like. This passage is a lot like May Day for them, except it's a May Day that's on the scale not just of 1 year, but on the scale of 50 or 60 years. A connection that I hadn't made until Sunday school, and Chris actually brought it up when we were studying this passage. He said it's a little bit, he compared it to 9/11. We weren't exiled from our country from 9/11. He's talking about the World Trade Center being rebuilt again. But home didn't feel like home anymore on 9/11 because the world was different. It was a completely different place. We hadn't been attacked on our own soil in that way to that scale ever before that day. And so Chris talked about how it was a little bit, this exile may have been something like that the people, of course, for Israel, not only were they attacked on their own soil and their cities laid waste, but then they were taken from their country. And so it would be a little bit like if 9/11 wasn't just one day, but it was multiple days. And then at the end of the war, we were all taken away. Let's taken to Europe or South America or Africa. And we couldn't come home. We couldn't come home. And home wouldn't be the same because it was all devastated from the war. And so that was really powerful for me when Chris shared that. I thought that was really cool because it's a way for me to connect with what these people might have felt when they were in exile. And then when we get this good news, so imagine that, well, maybe you were born away from your home country, away from home, and so you're far from home, and bless you. And then you hear these words, how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good news. I thought that it was funny just to think about how beautiful are the feet. I mean, how many of us have beautiful feet? You know, we don't think of feet as being beautiful, but when those feet are underneath a messenger who's bringing good news. The image here is of a messenger returning from the battle, coming back to the city to say, we've won. We've won the battle. And so the messenger coming out of the mountains being a place of strength. Last week, I look into the hills, from whence does my help come? The hills, the mountains were a place of strength. That was a place of the fortresses, a place of power, of might. So I look upon the places of power and might, and I see the feet of the one who brings good news, the messenger, the foot messenger, coming back from the battle, who publishes peace, who brings good news of happiness, who publishes salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. So there's 5 good newses here. Good news, publishes peace. Good news of happiness, publishes salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. It would be easy to imagine if you'd been away from your home country for 50 or 60 years. Well, does my God still reign? My God, the God of Jerusalem, my God of Zion? Look at how good this news is. It would be like saying 50 or 60 years, the World Trade Centers are going to rise again. Not just 10 or 11 years later, but 50 or 60 years later, and we're far away, but we hear this good tidings that our God reigns. How many of us in our lives sometimes might wonder, is God still in charge? Is God still on the throne? We might wonder that sometimes in our own lives. Verse 8, the voice of your watchmen, they lift up their voice together, they sing for joy. So now our vision is shifting from the mountains to the ramparts around the city, and the watchmen who are always keeping watch on behalf of the city. So now we see the watchmen on these ramparts all around the city who are looking out, who are watching, and they're seeing this messenger coming. They lift up their voice and together they sing for joy. So watchmen, when they're singing for joy, is that good news or bad news? Good news, thank you. Yes, it's very good news, because the watchmen don't sing for joy if they see the enemy coming, if they see more exile coming, but they see God coming. Together they sing for joy, for eye to eye they see the return of the Lord, of Yahweh, to Zion. For eye to eye. That would be like you're fixing supper, and somebody's coming, and you don't know when they're going to show up, and so you won't put on the last few items until you see the whites of their eyes. That's the image here. You know, because when you can see the whites of someone's eyes, they have to be a certain, unless you have amazing vision, they have to be pretty close. And here the image is For eye to eye they see the return of God to Zion. So this isn't like a far off, distant hope. This is face to face. I can see God coming back to Jerusalem. I can see a return to Zion. I can see a time of coming out of exile. This is really good news. It's not just kind of a distant hope that we're thinking about that might come about in years and years to come. It's a present reality. God is so close that it's right here. It's right now. It's not future, it's present. Break forth together into singing, you waste places of Jerusalem. Another translation says, you ruined places of Jerusalem. Break forth together into singing, you waste places of Jerusalem. So now it's one thing if it's the sunny part of Jerusalem where there's no devastation and everything's been cool. It was never damaged in the first place. But this good news is so good that even the waste places are commanded, instructed, invited to sing. It's that good a news. That good a news? I don't know if that's good grammar, but my grammar might not be good, but the news is good. That even the waste places of Jerusalem, the ruined parts of the city, are invited to sing together. Break forth together into singing, you waste places of Jerusalem. Join the watchmen in singing and rejoicing. For the Lord has comforted his people. These people that have been in exile for so long. It's been a dark, cold, wet winter for 50 or 60 years. And God is coming to comfort his people. I guess it's like the song. They have a song sheet. I must have set mine down someplace. It's like the song, the first song that we sang. Just when I think I'm safe and warm. You know, this is, God has comforted his people. I'm feeling safe and warm again for the first time in so many years. I haven't felt at home in so many years. And so God has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. He has redeemed Jerusalem. And here, I think the image is that the people of Jerusalem had gone so far from God. That was why they were in exile. God had said up front, here's the deal. If you continue to live this way, you're going to end up in exile. I mean, that's going to be the natural consequence of your choices. And I really don't want that. It's entirely up to you. I'm give you a heads up. And, well, they made those choices and they ended up in exile. And they were living with the consequences of their decisions, and we all know that that's a part of life, right? Hey? We live with the consequences of our decisions. And here, where we see that God is redeeming Jerusalem, God is paying that off. It's like we built up a debt. Like, maybe we run up the credit cards and we built up a huge debt. And the consequence of that is that we've got a big debt, and it'll take a lifetime or more to pay it off. Or maybe 2 or 3 lifetimes. And so God comes along and says, yeah. And maybe we've lived with that for some time. And God comes along and says, I want to comfort you. I want to strengthen you. I want to redeem you. And because we can't pay it off in our lifetime, or 2 lifetimes, or 3 lifetimes, God says, I'll pay it. I'll pay that debt. He has redeemed Jerusalem. I'll pay your debt that you've incurred. It's not mine, it's yours. I'm going to pay it. Because I don't want you to live forever under that debt. Because I know you can't pay it off in a long time. So for us today, Easter is May Day. Easter is May Day. This is a story of resurrection. We just celebrated Easter, and Easter is our May Day. Meaning that the earth itself has been groaning in expectation of hope, as Paul says in Romans. Waiting for the darkness to lift, waiting for the light of new day, waiting for flowers to be delivered to the door. And Easter for us is this story. Because for a world that has turned and continues to turn against God and against each other, God seeks to bring comfort and to redeem. And the debt that we've built up is so big. I mean, right now the world debt, just our U.S. debt is huge. Literally, it's literally huge. And the world debt is even bigger. And the debt of love that God invites us to love one another. In all of our lifetimes put together, there's a time to make it right. Easter gives us the hope. Easter reminds us that our God reigns. The disciples, they were totally unclear as to whether God reigned after Jesus died. And that was 3 days. But I could see them. In fact, who knows, maybe they might have read this scripture. Maybe they even read it after the resurrection. How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news, who publish peace, who bring good news of happiness, who publish salvation, who says to Zion, your God reigns. Okay, I'll just speak up. My battery's died. And so the women coming back from the tomb were like those messengers, bringing good news of salvation, that our God reigns. We thought that Jesus was dead and gone, and there was no possibility of there being any redemption. But Jesus lives. He has risen. He has risen. The voice of your watchmen, they lift up their voice. Together they sing for joy, for eye to eye they see the return of the Lord to Zion. The disciples saw Jesus face to face, and a lot of them needed that face-to-face experience. Because it wasn't enough to see from a distance. They wanted to touch him. They wanted to see him eat. They wanted to know that it was real. We want to see the whites of Jesus' eyes. We want to know that God reigns today when we've been in exile and we aren't sure at all that God reigns. We want to see the whites of his eyes. Break forth together into singing, you waste places of Jerusalem. Where there was weeping and mourning, there was the invitation to break forth into singing on the day of resurrection. Break forth into singing, you waste places of Jerusalem, for the Lord has comforted his people. How many times did the risen Jesus say, do not be afraid? Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid, for he has redeemed Jerusalem. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. That's the forgiving of the debt. That's the redemption. That forgiveness piece is the redemption. They're incurring a debt that they cannot pay. They're saying no to all I have to offer, and that's a debt they can't repay. And so, in raising Jesus from the dead, God says, I'll pay that. I'll give them another chance. I'll give them another chance. I'll give them another chance. That forgiveness is the redemption of Jerusalem, is the redemption of people like us. Jesus dying and being raised again is like a basket of flowers being left on the doorsteps on the knob of each of our homes. And on the knob of the home of every single human being out there, or for some people who don't have homes with knobs, on the doorstep, or at the place where they lay down to sleep. The death and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the forgiveness, the redemption of all the debt that we've incurred, of all the debt that Israel incurred, of all the debt that we've built up. So the next time you see a flower, I invite you to think of good news. And if your mind is drawn to the risen Lord and Savior Jesus, and thinking of him as a May Day basket of flowers, bringing good news after a time of exile, think about that too. And remember Jesus. Remember the beauty of God's returning to Zion. The beauty that our God reigns today and tomorrow and forevermore. Amen.